Welcome to my swamp plant farm, which we will discuss sometime later. I actually wanted to welcome you back to my Trade Empire series for X4 Foundations. So in part 1 you learned how to explore and trade, and in part 2 we talked about station construction. And once the station has been completed, this is where the real fun begins. We'll call this the optimization stage, where you will plan expansions for maximized production, because an unoptimized station is using but a fraction of its potential. There are 3 elements which must be taken into consideration during this stage: subordinates, manufacturing, and workforce. The subordinates are in charge of supplying the station with resources, so it may continuously produce without any interruptions. For manufacturing, you have to take into account how many intermediate goods are being fabricated, and how many of them are needed for the final product. Sometimes you'll need to amp up the intermediate goods production, other times the ones you already have are enough to supply multiple high-end modules. Finally, the workforce will increase the productivity of all of your modules by an additional 28 to 38%. These workers need to be housed into habitat, dome, or biome modules depending on their species. Different workers also require different types of food and medicine. Argons will need foodstuffs. The Paranid consumes soya husk, while the Telari subsist on a diet of nostrop oil. My workforce consists solely of humans because I lack the other types of habitat modules, but if you obtain all of them, it's in your best interest to build modules to house the species which inhabits the current system. More specifically, if you build in Paranid space, use dome modules for Paranid workers. The food they need is closer, and it gets delivered to your station faster than the other types of foods. The number of employees you have to hire will increase for each factory you add to your station. You can see how many workers are needed to maximize production by taking a look in the logical overview on the workforce tab, listed as optimal number of workers. For example, my spaceweed farm, which has 5 production modules, only needs 420 workers, but you can see that my big Claytronics complex needs a whole lot more. Build biomes to accommodate the exact number of workers you need. A small habitat can house 250 workers, the medium modules accommodate 500, and the large one is big enough for 1000 people. Once you build these habitation modules, the workforce won't come instantly. It's a gradual process that can take a while. Once every hour, the shift changes, and more people will join your workforce until the optimal threshold is reached. But if you fail to provide for their basic needs, such as the food and medicine mentioned earlier, your workers will quit their jobs. So if you don't produce those wares yourself and your supply ships don't do their jobs either, consider allowing others to trade with you and enable automatic pricing. I feel I went a bit overboard discussing workforce, but trust me, they are important, especially in big complexes. You'll see exactly how as we go along. Now let us discuss the manufacturing process. Once the station is complete, you can take a look at the logical overview and take note of the resource costs for each of your goods, as well as the amount of wares you actually manufacture, and see how they're being factored into the final product. This is somewhat simplified by the fact you can see the resource costs and wares produced per hour, so you can base your calculations on that. First of all, how many energy cells do you produce in an hour, and are they enough to sustain all of the modules without hiccups in the production? If yes, then it's time to look at the microchips, for example. Let's see. Without workforce, we manufacture 480, and we need 1200 silicon wafers to sustain production. How many silicon wafers are being refined per hour? 2400. This means that our refinery can sustain 2 microchip fabs. Because the production is too precise, adding workforce won't help your silicon refinery sustain a 3rd microchip factory. Now that we've looked this over, we need to see if we can maximize our Claytronics production by adding another module. But what's this? A single Claytronics factory needs 640 microchips, while our single facility produces 480. We're in trouble, so we have to add that second chip module. But once we do, without workforce, our 2 factories will produce 960 microchips, enough to sustain 1 Claytronics module full-time, with enough left over for sustaining another one half the time. 960 divided by 640 gives us 1.5. So what can we do to sustain the second Claytronics module full-time as well? How about adding workforce into the equation, because as I've already said, they increase production without using additional resources. If the maximum production bonus is 38%, what is the minimum production percentage that we need to fully sustain 2 Claytronics modules with only 2 microchip factories? Well, I've done the calculations, and the minimum bonus percentage we need is 34. Because the bonus on each of the modules can range between 28 and 38%, this means we're taking a bit of a gamble here. Will we get the 34% we need? Only time will tell. Now, why is this the minimum percentage? Well, 34% of 960 equals 326 more microchips. Add that to the already present 960 and you get a total of 1286, which, if we divide by 640, the number of microchips needed for one Claytronics factory, we get a measly 2.009, which means the 34% workforce bonus is barely enough to sustain 2 Claytronics modules full-time, provided the raw resources are constantly being supplied and production goes on without a hitch. This is good enough, but as I've said, it's kind of a gamble. At first glance, you might look at the additional cost of the workforce and decide that the 38% bonus on a single module is not enough to justify the purchase of foodstuffs and medicine. But once you remember that they increase production on all of your modules, you will start seeing that they contribute a lot more by allowing you to sustain a whole nother module and double your production. Scratch that, you don't double because, unoptimized, your Claytronics factory produces 476 wares. Workforce allows you to place another module, taking it to 952, and on top of that, they add a potential 38% bonus to both of them for a total of 1,313 Claytronics produced per hour. That's 2.75 times more than a single unoptimized factory produces, and it uses the same raw resources you'd use anyway, therefore at no additional production cost. Think about it, nearly 3 times the production for a measly price of a few foodstuffs and some medicine. And just to look at the profits, how much can our optimized Claytronics factory earn us in an hour? Selling our 1,300 Claytronics for the average price of 2,000 credits earns us 2.6 million credits gross income, without factoring in the additional yet negligible cost of maintaining the workforce. Perhaps the raw profit would be about 2.4 to 2.5 million per hour, but as you play this game for hundreds of hours, that will add up to a nice amount. And that's just a single complex. Remember that you can have a whole lot of stations and auto traders which are all going to increase your earnings. Now back to optimization to make things crystal clear. This time we'll look at our quantum tubes production module. It requires 200 energy cells, irrelevant, 150 superfluid coolant, also irrelevant, and 580 graphene. Now this is problematic because we only produce 1650. Because the graphene is required in greater amounts than the other resources, we will consider it to be the bottleneck of our quantum tube production. The bottleneck material is basically the one that limits the amount of production modules you can place. For example, the microchips represent the bottleneck for the previously discussed Claytronics. So without workforce, the graphene bottleneck only allows us to place 2.8 quantum tube fabs. But 2.8 is really close to 3, so even with just a little bit of workforce, we'll be able to increase the graphene production to allow a third quantum tube fab, which would give us a total of 1,650 quantum tubes per hour. But do we need that many? A single Claytronics factory only needs 400 quantum tubes, and with 2 quantum tube fabs, we can comfortably sustain the 2 Claytronics factories we have planned. But if we add a third quantum production, we can manufacture surplus quantum tubes, which we can occasionally sell for extra profits, and that's at no additional cost. So that's something worth considering. So to summarize the optimization stage, I am planning 2 additional quantum tube modules, 1 extra microchip factory, and 1 more Claytronics production. Oh, and a whole lot more habitat modules because so many factories will require at least 2,000 workers. They'll cost a little bit to maintain, but if you take care of them, they will take care of your profits. Now that the station is built, it's time to set the parameters for each of our wares. Since the end goal item I'm producing is Claytronics, this is the only one that has a sale price and no buying price. Everything else is both a product which can be sold but also a resource which can be bought. So, at first you're going to want to set the price of your Claytronics to maximum -1. If somebody desperately needs it, it will be bought for that price. But if you want to determine the minimum profitable price, you'll have to use the trade filter and look for buy offers. Take the highest offer, subtract 2 credits, and that's your minimum price. This will have to be done periodically because prices tend to change over time. As for the other wares, do yourself a favor and click on Restrict trade with other factions, because if they sell to you, they'll cut into your profits, and if they buy those intermediate goods, you can be left with no resources to continue the production of Claytronics. We don't want any of that. Since you've disabled trading, you can leave the price of both buy and sell to maximum. Now there's also this other option to adjust the price automatically. Leave it on for now, don't worry about it, I'll tell you later why. One intermediate good you're going to want to fiddle with are the quantum tubes. At first, when the supply is low, you're going to want to place trade restrictions on it as well, but once you start having a surplus, it's time to open it up to the public. Disable the automatic pricing and take the buy offer to the lowest, and adjust the sale offer to highest -2. Better yet, leave the trade restriction on and sell the surplus manually. But if you lifted the trade restriction, you might want to check your stock from time to time. You wouldn't want to run out of quantum tubes and halt your Claytronics production. One thing to remember is that you'll need to experiment. Raise the prices little by little on both the quantum tubes and the Claytronics and see how much you can get away with. If nobody buys your stock, you can always fine-tune the price so you can maximize your earnings. Alright, you set up every single where in the logical overview, and it is time to assign some ships to work as subordinates for your station. So how do you do that? Well, any station is going to need at least one hauler to either supply it with materials or sell its product. So buy yourself a medium-sized hauler with decent cargo capacity, and when it's built, tell its captain to dock to the station he will work for. Then, open the map, click the ship, right-click the station and assign it as a trader. Now, if you didn't place trade restrictions, that ship will bring in a needed material or sell the product automatically. And the smart thing about it is that it will never sell your product for less than the price you've chosen, nor will it import required resources for more than the price you've picked. Of course, the Claytronics production will not buy any resource, but perhaps you will have stations that aren't as self-sufficient and need to be supplied with energy cells or water or spices. The trader would supply the station all by himself, if we lived in an ideal world. Instead, he chooses to prioritize smuggling space weed in a slow hauler. And then he gets caught by police, losing me a lot of money in the process. Repeat ad infinitum until he got fired. More on that later. That is a problem of mine which I still don't know how to resolve. At the end of part 2, I told you to hire a manager for each of your stations. The reason you do that is so he can manage the workers you've assigned to the factories, otherwise the subordinates will just loiter around with no goal in mind, even though their behavior page states the opposite. They just won't work without someone prodding them. Back to the subject at hand. The Claytronics factory needs raw resources to supply its refineries, so what do? Well, we will assign some miners to obtain those resources. First, we will need 2 mineral harvesters. I personally chose the argon drills for that. They used to mine Nevidium, but demand dried up, so now they're stuck mining silicon for wafer refinement. Order these miners to dock at the station, select them, right-click the factory, and assign them as miners. Just like you've done with the traders. From here on out, they will scour the universe in search of silicon asteroids. If I notice the silicon supplied by these two isn't enough and production slows down, I will add another drill, and then another and another until production stabilizes. Next, I need to assign some gas miners to supply the other modules. 3 modules, 3 miners, right? So allow me to buy 3 Sunder-class ships, and once assigned to mining for the complex, they will each harvest 1 type of gas to ensure a steady supply. Now that I've assigned them, we'll just wait for them to return. Wait, what's this? Only hydrogen? Where's the helium and the methane? Oh, perhaps I need to manually select and deselect which resources these ships should harvest, just like I did when I was giving them automine jobs. What the hell? It's grayed out. I can't eliminate the hydrogen and methane from the list of resources mined by what I intended to be the helium harvesters. What the hell? Well, this is a big problem, and it applies to traders as well. Remember when I talked about the knucklehead who kept smuggling space weed instead of supplying its farm with spices? That was his problem too. In previous X games, you could assign 5 different trading ships to a station, and you could choose the specific resource each of those ships would supply. That ensured a smoothly running operation with everyone having his focus on a single job. Now I don't know what causes these wares to be grayed out. I don't know how to fix it. Perhaps you need a 5-star manager and a 5-star pilot before you're able to give them the same commands you'd give to a 0-star rookie pilot. Or maybe there's something else I'm missing. I don't know, I only spent 70-something hours on this playthrough, and maybe I need to spend a lot more for my personnel to improve its skills. As I've said, I do not know the fix, nor do I know how to Google a solution, because the query X4 Foundation Station Trader wears grayed out doesn't yield any useful results. All I have found is a mod which may already be outdated, and this mod apparently allows you to choose the wares supplied or sold by your station subordinates. But this should be fixed without a mod, don't you think so, Egosoft? I mean, I could do it in the previous X games, so why not this one? So for the third time, I do not know how to fix the issue, but I can give you some workarounds. First, the superfluid coolant and graphene refinery modules will have to be eliminated from the complex and placed on separate stations. In their stead, I will place the expansions I've mentioned earlier. The graphene station will actually have 2 refineries to eliminate the need for a workforce. The workforce is useful for optimization purposes when you have multiple types of modules which depend on each other, otherwise, it's kind of a waste. The reason I put the refineries on different stations is to make the miners focus on gathering the resource the refinery needs. Otherwise, they'll just gather whatever is closest and ignore the other ones, as you've just witnessed. So to wrap up the whole Claytronics chapter, my complex will consist of the following: 2 Claytronics manufactorums, 3 quantum tube fabs, 2 microchip factories, 1 silicon refinery, and 1 antimatter cell production. 2 sonders and 2 drills should be more than enough to ensure a steady supply of hydrogen and silicon for the antimatter and the microchips respectively. Then in the same system I will build 2 separate stations, one which refines helium into superfluid coolant, and one with 2 graphene refineries which will need to be supplied with methane. Each of the support stations will have their own gas harvesters and haulers, and their products will be restricted from the other factions. Because of the trade restrictions, the hauler's only job is to move the products to the only station that buys them, namely the Claytronics factory. This isn't 100% guaranteed to work, but it's worth a try. This is how I actually organized my first stations in the lawless system Nopeleus's Fortune. Let's take a look there and explain what I've done. As you can see, I have 5 separate stations here. We can ignore the venture dock. I built it a long time ago and still don't know exactly what it does. Anyway, the first station I built here was the booze distillery. At first it was just a wheat farm with 1 space fuel module, but when I discovered my farm produces enough wheat to sustain 5 of these, I built the remaining 4. Then, when I realized workforce increases the production of all my modules to the extent where the farm can support a 6th, I added that as well. And now this station makes me about 1 million per hour. Then, because the cost of importing water was cutting into my profit, I decided I need to make the water myself, so I built a station with some dock modules, some storage modules, and 2 water refineries, which are constantly being supplied by a bunch of ice miners. The pilots of these ships are going to be managers on my next stations if they work hard enough and they get skilled. This station has both container storage and solid storage. The ice is considered a solid ware and can only be moved around by miners. Anyway, the IDES hauler assigned here was supposed to do 2 jobs: supply energy cells and deliver water to the distillery. Alas, it only focused on the latter, which is fine by me, but if I could select the wares, I'd have another ship bring the energy cells to ensure complete autonomy without my periodic intervention. After I saw the distillery works perfectly and the water production can go on without a hitch, I decided to supply relaxation to the people passing through my system. So I quickly obtained the blueprints for swamp plant and spaceweed production, and expecting things to work like the distillery, I placed down 1 swamp plant farm and thought it could supply 5 spaceweed modules by itself. I was wrong. The swamp plant production could only sustain roughly 1.25 spaceweed farms. But that just gave me an idea to optimize the production. With 2 swamp plant modules I could supply 2.5 spaceweed farms, and I could barely stretch that number to a 3.1 with about 500 workforce. So in the end, my spaceweed station has 2 swamp plant modules, 3 spaceweed modules, and 1 medium habitat which can comfortably house the 420 workers needed to keep things running smoothly. All they'd need is to be kept fed and healthy, and I'd reap the profits. By the way, the things needed for the workforce are cheap enough that I don't need to bother supplying myself. I enable trade with other faction and the price is automatically adjusted depending on its needs. When supplies run low, freelancers sell them to me for a profit. The station makes enough money where I don't notice that small dent in my budget. Anyway, this was a more simplified explanation to station optimization with the help of workforce. In the same system, I also have a solar power plant with 2 production modules, with a hauler assigned as a subordinate. Since trading with others is disabled, this hauler supplies my water production, space fuel distillery, and spaceweed farm with much needed energy cells, depending on their needs. Price adjustment is enabled, so when a factory runs low on energy cells, its buying price increases and my hauler prioritizes that station instead of the others. I may be wrong here though, because that is just a theory. A game theory. Sorry. Not sorry, I had to do it. Verify that theory yourself and see if it works. All in all, Nopele's fortune is home to a successful operation which works very well despite the fact that the stations are separate and not pushed together into the same complex. This way everything has its focus on a job and it does that job well, so in a way, I guess that inspired my decision to separate these topics into 3 separate videos instead of making a single 1-hour long video. That would have gotten very frustrating for me. Anyway, this operation could work as a single complex due to the fact it only needs one mineable resource: ice. And if one day I decide to move them all to the same complex, I could simply hire construction ships to disassemble my stations, then I'd haul the construction materials to the station I decided to expand. Afterwards, it would only be a matter of time before I rebuilt the modules on the main complex. Doing that, however, would waste workforce on water and energy cell production, and that isn't quite optimal. By the way, to have one of your ships trade goods with your station, you select that ship, right-click the station and select Transfer Wares With. To transfer construction materials instead, you choose Transfer With Build Storage here. Anyway, this series is about building a trading empire, not an actual empire. I believe the formal term for a trade empire is corporation, and I guess this is what I taught you during this 3-part series. Now, before bringing this video and the series to a close, allow me to give you a few more random tips that could help you in your corp career. Number 1. At the start of the game, to find a looping highway, ask other ship captains for directions to the nearest shipyard. This should have been mentioned in part 1, but I forgot. Number 2. Have an actual naming convention for your ships if you want to easily navigate your property list. As you can see, my primary combat ship is labeled CBT-Aggressor. CBT stands for Combat, and Aggressor is basically a word that begins with A, so the ship would be at the top of my list. Then I use TRA for Trade, SEC for Sector Security, and so on and so forth. You can make your own naming convention, you don't need to use mine. Number 3. Since this is about empire building, you should expand in as many sectors as you can, with as many operations as you can. Once you get insanely wealthy, you can manufacture entire fleets and even take over sectors if you're into that sort of thing. Number 4. If you need a quick influx of cash, there's nothing cheaper and more profitable than crystal mining. I avoided it for the longest time because I preferred ship capturing and boarding, but once I gave in and saw how profitable it is, I left piracy as a last resort method of making money. Number 5 was mentioned in the video, but just like in the real world, booze and weed are very profitable. There's a lot of dopamine hounds who are gonna make you a lot of money. Just don't consume any of the product or else you'll cut into your profits. Those were the first stations I built, and the best. Perhaps I'll build another operation just like this in another sector. Number 6 should have been mentioned in the first episode, but early on, you should sell all of your deployables and buy a better weapon. The equipment dock in Black Hole Sun is well stocked, unlike the other places where you can upgrade your ship. With a Mark II pulse laser, you can start capturing these Marauder ships, whose equipment can earn you about 1 million credits. Or you can choose to keep one of these ships and use that instead. The Discoverer, for example, can fit twice the weapons an Elite can. Number 7 is a continuation of number 6. Ships with a Marauder label are actually pirate ships in disguise. Attacking these won't decrease your relations with any of the main factions, and as I've already said, they're quite profitable. And number 8, protect your assets. If you notice your auto traders run into trouble, assign one ship to protect them from marauders. Then when the trader is in danger, you can teleport to their escort and solve the problem yourself. In the same manner, you will have to keep your freighters safe from the Xenon Branch 9 Destroyer K. The cheapest and most effective tactic I have for dispatching these is using a Minotaur Vanguard. I put plasma cannons in the turret bays, and its main weapons consist of 2 torpedo launchers. I load those with 16 light torpedoes and about 20 heavies. I then approach the K from behind, target its back turrets, and simultaneously launch 2 light torpedoes towards them once I'm in range. As soon as the back turrets are offline, I quickly approach the K and get right up its ass. Then I stay there like a sore thumb as my plasma cannons deplete its shields and I switch to heavy torpedoes. You can fire these at will, but if you wish to confirm the kill, wait until the K is below 20% hull, then launch the 2 heavy torpedoes simultaneously. Each torpedo deals 10% hull damage, but you need to be sure it's below 20% to confirm the kill. Claiming last hit on one of these will reward you 200,000 credits, and an extra 600k if you have a police license for the faction whose space you just cleared from the threat. Not a lot of cash, but at least it's enough to get your torpedoes back. Well, that is it. Those tips were just afterthoughts that I got while recording and editing these videos. I hope they're helpful. For now I've said all I could say because this video dragged on long enough. But now it is finally over. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos or live streams. Goodbye.